Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great day. So, it looks like we have the new Cities of Sigmar on the horizon. By this point, all the new models have been shown, and in addition to that, some of you might already be aware of this, but the new Battletome has also been pretty much all leaked online already. So initially I was going to go over that, but I realized going through that it was going to be a pretty long video given the sheer breadth of all the changes being done. So I've made a part 1 video that's just going to do a brief overview of all the changes for those who probably didn't want to sit through all that. But don't worry, I'm going to get the part 2 done in short order. So you have that to look forward to. So let's just go over basically all the changes and what I think about them in an abridged version. So, new tome, new world, and how true that is. So basically, there are some big change-ups in this book overall. Honestly, more change-ups than I initially had assumed. Like, I knew they were going to go over and redo the book from the ground up, but I didn't expect to see this many overall changes. So basically, I think, as people have probably already seen from all the advertisements, this new tome is very heavily focused on the Free Guild human aspect of the book overall. Which, honestly, anyone who paid attention to GW's model and advertising strategies, basically, they always focus around the new models that are coming up. Like, same thing with, the Auric War Clans. Like, pretty much everything was heavily focused on the Cruel Boys, as those are the new models. Well, at least for this particular version of the tome, it's very heavily focused on the Free Guild. Which, don't worry, there's other stuff in the book, too, but this is a human world, for the most part. But I'll get more into that. Overall, there's some good and some bad in the books. Definitely, I would say more good. But the problem is, I feel like this is going to be a very broken base argument for the change in the book, because the changes are probably going to upset a lot of people, and they're going to make other people very happy. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of middle ground, which I'll get to in a second. So let's dive a little bit more into what I mean about that. So, for those wondering, book lore. For those wondering, I will give you some good news. The lore in this particular Battletome, I would say, is much more better presented than it was in the last book. Like, I feel the last book just really kind of shortchanged the lore aspect of the Cities of Sigmar a lot more. Like, maybe that was intentional, to give more a homebrew kind of feel, but I feel, honestly, it's just that book, it's obvious the last book was so kind of haphazardly thrown together that it's clear they didn't put a lot of emphasis on the lore aspect of the book itself. Well, this, I think they really came into their own a bit more. So, one thing I did notice, however, it's definitely, in terms of lore, they're definitely speaking a lot more heavily on the Free Guild aspect of how the city's forces function. Again, it's very obvious that this has to do with, just because that's the new models they're trying to push here. So I hope you like Free Guild, because you're going to get a lot of them in the lore sections. It's good lore, by the way. I'm not saying there's anything in particular bad. Like, I feel like it really gives an idea of how the Free Guild function and what it means to be a Free Guild human in the Cities of Sigmar. Now, I would another thing to keep in mind, however, the book also, I would say, definitely push the idea that these are very much the Age of Sigmar version of the Free Guild. So for those who liked the floppy hats and the feathers, well, out with the old, in with the much newer. Yeah, and I will say, though, that there is some really interesting... They did do an interesting way of to an extent, explaining this new look of the Cities of Sigmar. Specifically the Free Guild, just by their new look. It's basically like I'll get into more detail in the following video, but essentially the reason they look the way they do is just they've changed their tactics to be as the different Dawnbringer crusades have been sent out, to be much more defensively oriented and a lot more a lot more mobile with heavier firepower. So the reason that they look so okay, well, the one reason they look so drastic is we're using updated models. In universe, you could probably argue they look so drastic is because they've been changed up to be more effective when going on crusading forces and being constantly attacked. So I kind of like that little thing to explain how come we never really saw all these fancy shield locking equipment and all that kind of stuff. As it's explained, it's basically their innovations that have changed as the cities have adopted new tactics. So I like that part too. Having said that, it still covers the elves and the Duardin, however, and well, obviously not to the same extent. But let's not kid ourselves here. We will not be seeing probably a ton of additional lore on these guys until they get new models themselves. Which, to be fair, I think will be coming in the future. I think they just wanted to focus on the humans because they need to get the models out. I think the next round of models will be about these guys, like the elves and the Duardin of the city, and I think they'll get a lot more lore tidbits. But they did get some good stuff in here, in terms of how the Duardin and the elves are supporting and living within the cities themselves. I think it was very well done. But the broad idea of the lore is basically just how the cities are expanding off into the wilderness in order not so much just for the sake of exploration or just resource gathering. Well, that is a heavy part, but it's also they're also kind of pushing a much more like-minded idea of aggressive defense, especially with the new, with some of these new Dawnbringer Crusade campaigns. It's just that, okay, well, we cannot just sit here and get pummeled endlessly. We actually have to go out there and start taking territory, taking resources, because we're just going to get whittled away if we just hide behind these walls. But the thing is, another big theme of these is the idea of sacrifice. Like the Cities of Sigmar's army take heavy casualties more often than not, doing the objectives of these crusades up to the point where they might not they start to even wonder, are these even worth it? But before you start thinking, oh well, this is just looking very dire. Well, don't worry. It definitely drives home the point that even though that sacrifices are being made, there is success and there is hope in all this. So I'm just kind of glad they're keeping the idea of that. The idea of there's great trial coming, there's trial and hardship, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So I do like that. Also, another big thing I like is they're definitely starting to de-emphasize that whole racial divide thing between the humans and the elves a little bit. That kind of popped up in Broken Realms. For the most part, they basically just say that, with the exception of maybe a few cities, the various races then pretty much all get along. Everyone just kind of doesn't really care that much, which I think is good, because I honestly, that whole oh, we're suspicious of each other thing they were pushing, kind of at the beginning of the new edition. I found it was just a cheap way to create drama. So I'm glad they kind of pushed that away. So now the book rules. Well, like I was mentioning before, big changes. So again, I'll go into more details in a follow-up video, but the basic overview of it is there's a lot less emphasis on using other tomes, unfortunately. By that I mean is the last Cities of Sigmar Battletome was, hypothetically speaking, you could have half your models not even come from the actual book. There was a lot more emphasis on using Stormcast Eternals or using Sylvaneth in your army. This book very much the rules. While you don't get me wrong, you can still definitely use units from other Battletomes. The rules of this current book definitely put more emphasis on using the actual models in the book to create combos. Much more and to a much greater extent as the last book. So that's going to be, I think that's good and bad, which I'll get to in a minute. In addition, and another thing. Well, I will say this though before moving on though. This definitely will have an impact on certain army builds. Like that whole thing with having tons of Stormcast in there for tankers and that sort of thing. Well, though the rules definitely aren't going to be pushing that as much as it used to be. So you will have to adapt your strategy accordingly. One of the biggest changes I found in the book, there's a new order system that I think is actually somewhat unique to this army. Now, the overall, now this is also in addition to the individual city rules. Like that has not changed. When you pick your army, you have to pick it to come from a specific city, which gives you a rule. And this is very similar to the other sub-faction rules we're seeing throughout 3rd edition, where basically you pick a sub-faction and it just gives you one rule that greatly influences your army construction. So that has not changed. This ordering system is completely unique. It's basically like how it functions is kind of like how command points work, but they're done in addition to any command points you can spend. And there's unique ones for human units, unique ones for Duardin units, there's unique ones for elf units, and this is a big point. They don't preclude you from also using command abilities as well as in addition to these. So yeah, I can definitely see some combos coming in here, which I'm really looking forward to talking about. And I think some people have definitely pointed this out. It's very similar in a lot of ways to the Imperial Guard from 40K, and judging from the lore sections of this book and the whole idea of like sacrificing the many for a brighter future kind of thing, I think there's definitely a lot more parallels to the Imperial Guard in this book than there was before. Now, that's not to say that they're the same, because they're not, but I'm definitely seeing a lot more rules interactions that definitely remind me of the Imperial Guard, like stacking orders, hero units, creating useful buffs for mass infantry, mass shooting, to make up for the fact you're not really that strong, they're not that durable in combat, that sort of thing. And it definitely also helps too that out of all of the units in the book, I'd say almost everything got better in my regard. Like, I do not say this lightly. Like over all of the War Scrolls, they almost universally, I think, are better than they were in the last book. Which, to be fair, is not really all that hard, because that book was so old. A lot of those War Scrolls were just incredibly old. They were outdated as heck. So that really, so as I say this, I realize that's a pretty low bar to make them all better. But I do like what they did with them in a lot of ways and how they interact with each other. Also, pretty much everything in this book is super cheap. Like, I don't think there's a single thing in this book that was more than like $350 at most. Like, you can definitely cram a lot of stuff into an army. Like, which is going to be good and bad, because I can probably already hear some people complaining, oh, I'm gonna have to paint up like 200 models now. Well, don't worry, there are definitely ways to play this army that you can go more elite, but yes, you can definitely fit a lot of it in there. And if I'm going to be perfectly honest, the book rules definitely are leaning towards anvil units for blocking and mass shooting, because there's a lot of good shooting in this army. I'm just going to say that right now. So, I'm just going to get it out of the way real quickly. I'll just talk about the stuff I didn't particularly like. So, now, when I say I didn't like, I actually think objectively this book is actually really good. At least at the moment, until we get obviously some things could change once we get once we get more actual data of models on the table. But this book overall, I think, is very strong. However, there's a lot of design changes to this book that I didn't particularly like from my perspective. For one thing, as some people already point out, it seems we've lost coalition for the most part, and you know, basically like where you could bring in models from other battle tomes above the minimum requirements for allies. So yeah, that I definitely miss. So you know, like it looks like now maybe this could be maybe this might change. Maybe I missed something, but from the way it seems to be we've lost coalition. So you know, the days of like bringing half your army being like Stormcast Eternals, that seems to be gone. Like you can only take things as allies now. Now, having said that, there are ways to interact with allies to a greater extent than a lot of other armies, but I'm sorry, it's just not the same. Like, on the other hand, I do see a lot of people like probably can actually liking this because as some people pointed out, try like the whole idea of balancing that many models that you could bring in from coalition with all the rules in the new book. I get it. It probably would have been a little bit too much, but I just mean from like a flavor perspective, it's just really sad because I liked all the different ways you could change up the army list building and so many unique armies you get on the table. Now, having said that, you can definitely get a lot of unique armies on the table. That has not changed, but not nearly to the extent you had before, I'm afraid. Another thing is, I think there's a little bit too much focus on the newer units. By that I mean I don't know how the meta is going to change up, but at least from promotional status, I kind of would have liked to hear things a little bit beyond just free guild. Like I get they're all the new models, but basically like every single thing that came out about this army up to release, it's basically just all free guild all the time. Like I would have at least liked a little bit of talk about like, you know, like how exactly can we use these allies like Sylvaneth in this book a little more, or how about talk about the auxiliaries a bit. I don't know. That's just a bit of a pet peeve of mine. And as I just mentioned, this is definitely going to mess up a lot of current builds for a lot of people. Like for example, that one guy who had like half his army was basically just Stormcast Eternals and Sylvaneth and always ran like Living City. Well, guess what, buddy? I'm afraid that list is probably going to be illegal now because you can only take those guys as allies. Again, unless this changes or I miss something. Because honestly, this is one of the things I hope I misread something. Because I really wouldn't. It'd be sad to see those go, but all signs are pointing to yes. So this is probably going to mess up a lot of armies for people, and people are going to have to adapt. On top of that, the city's rules themselves are also a lot less unique. By less unique, I mean, like I said, they don't give like unique artifacts or unique spells anymore. There's just individual command traits, spells, and artifacts for human, elf, and Duerden, and you can take those no matter what city you take. All the city does is basically just give you special rules, like just one or two special rules, like the other Battletome ones, like Stormhost for Stormcast. So on the one hand, I do see people liking this because it means that armies are a lot less can be a lot less standardized because for example, like if I wanted to get that one good artifact, I had to take Tempest Eye, or if I wanted that one good spell, I had to take Hollowheart. Well, that's not a problem anymore. It just means that now the cities are just, you know, you take them for like a unique buff that you really want, not because you need because you need to focus your whole army around. And on top of this, like I said before, the artifacts, the spells, the command traits, the new command system, it's pretty much completely changed up from the last book, except for a few things. Like in addition, a lot of the war scrolls have changed up significantly too. So in a lot of ways, even Cities of Sigmar veterans, you've got a lot to. You've got a lot to talk about in terms of like relearning what you've previously learned. Also, the models are awesome. I just want to say, even though I have complained that Free Guild are getting too much attention, they're just so good looking. A part of me kind of wants to see more of them, but the other part of me is, okay, we've enough already. All right. Well, anyway, stuff I did like. So, like I said, now, even though I did some gripes before, I will say again, I do believe overall this book is actually very good. Like, there's some really good stuff in here. like gripes aside, yes, there's been going to be some big change to army construction, and yes, with some things where there's some things in the book that were maybe not necessary to be changed. Overall, the book I think is very, very good, and I think it will be competitive on the tabletop. For one thing, I do like how, even though we lost a lot of the things that Coalition brought us, I do feel the book has a much stronger sense of identity now. Like, there was kind of like an offhand, like, joke about Cities of Sigmar last edition, where it was basically called Battletome Order Soup. So even though, yes, there were like unique units in the book, like you could often see like some armies where like 70% of the models aren't even technically in the book because you could bring so much coalition. So for example, like I said, you could bring like Living City, and like more than half your units aren't even in the book. So I do get why GW probably did that, because they probably were trying to clamp down. Like, this is from a meta perspective, not in-universe thing. I think GW was trying to clamp down on people who were just spamming Stormcast or like Caradron Overlords instead of actually buying the models for the book proper. So like there's probably like some exec at GW saying, buy the models, jerks. Stop just spamming Stormcast or whatever you do these days. So, but due to that, however, that does mean now all the models and the army attacks in the book feel much more unique to themselves. Like, this is not Order Soup. This really does feel like Cities of Sigmar, if that makes sense to you. And also, again, like I said, the book now has a lot more unique army mechanics. Like the army mechanics in the last book, I feel were a little bit light. In that, by that I mean is that there weren't a ton of like battle traits or army-wide rules, because again, the book was bringing in so many units from so many different other battle tomes. It had to remain. The rules of Cities of Sigmar had to remain light just to make sure they didn't run into any accidental, power gaming moves. Because remember, you had to balance every single rule in that book against every single unit in, like, Stormcast Eternal, Sylvaneth, Caradron Overlords, what else? The Lumineth Realm Lords. Like, there was just so many other units you had to balance again. You can't make them too complex. Well, now that they're kind of like dialing that down a little bit, now they've given a lot more flavor to the Cities of Sigmar rule set themselves, especially with the new order system, which again, like I said, I'll get into in more detail in a follow-up video. Now, having said that, I also want to say there's also a lot less overlap in this book as there was in the last book. By that I mean is that I feel like in the last book, especially because they kept everything a little bit intentionally light in the rules department, there was a lot of unit overlap. Like, for example, like, the handgunners, they had a real hard time. They were like overlapping a lot with like Sisters of the Watch, in the shooting department, or with the Dispossessed in the shooting department. Like, it just got to the point where, too many units were doing too much of the same thing, and they just weren't individually unique enough to really justify them. So that's why you got basically just some units you just never saw ever. Well, this, I feel like, with the changes, I think they've done a better job of making each sub-faction of the Cities of Sigmar have their own strengths and weaknesses and reasons to bring them. Like, for example, right here, I honestly believe in this new book, you will actually see Shadowblade units on the table. I'm not even joking. I think I think every single sub-faction now has a lot more to bring than it ever did before. And because of that, I think there'll still be lots of character in army construction. And also, ironically, even though I've been mentioning all this time, the lore and the rules maybe have been like less focused on auxiliary and more focused on like the free guild aspect of the book, I will actually say the actual auxiliary like factions in the book, like the Dispossessed or the Scourge Privateers, they are actually much better than they were before. Like, especially units like the Scourge Privateers or the Order Serpentis or whatever. Like, they are, even the Ironweld Arsenal is looking a lot better. Like, they did a much better job of making the rules work much better for them. even though, like, for example, like there's okay, some people will probably bring up that, okay, there's probably, to an extent, there's less unit there's less unit overlap between the factions. By that I mean is that, like, for example, human, like, heroes and units only really affect each other, and elf units and heroes only affect each other, and Duerden units and heroes only affect each other. Some people, I think, I have heard some people complain that they wish there was more overlap between the factions. Like, for example, like a free guild marshal having a greater effect over, let's say, like, Iron Breakers from Dispossessed. On the one hand, I do see where they're coming from, and actually maybe in the future I think they should do that. But I actually think, just for this, I think that was actually a good idea, and here's why I think that. I'll get into more detail in the future, but I feel like if they had done that, it would have probably made it so they would have made individual sub-faction rules worse. By that I mean is they would have made, like, because remember, every time if one hero affects another unit, that unit now has to be balanced against all the different buffs it can get throughout the book. So now, if the Free Guild Marshal can also affect Elf and Duerden factions, now whatever he does, he's got to be balanced against every single other faction in the book. And by doing so, they're going to have to lessen whatever abilities he can grant to make sure they don't accidentally make, like, Iron Breakers the most broken thing on the planet. So I feel like by just limiting their interaction a little bit, they allowed for the individual sub-factions to be more easily balanced, and thus they could make their abilities more beneficial and effective on the table. And the thing is, there are ways to have have rules affect everything on the table, and commands you can give to any unit on the table. So I think that's good. Now, I do think in the future, I think they should gradually start allowing the units to affect each other, no matter if it was a human general, an elf general, or a Duerden general. But for now, I actually think this is okay. Having said that, too, I do also like that there is ways to give additional buffs to allies. Now, like I said, even though Coalition may be gone, there are city rules, like city subfactions, like Living City and Tempest Eye, that do give special rules to allies that are included in the army. So, like with Tempest Eye, like, here's a little spoiler, Tempest Eye allows, like, allied Caradron Overlord units to... I think it allows them to disengage and shoot, or I think, sorry, I don't have it with me open right now. I think that's what it does. But what I'm trying to say is that they do get special rules, so they're not completely left out in the dark. Or, for example, Living City allows you to, like, put units into reserve for every ones you include on the table. And you can also do that for allied Sylvaneth as well. So basically, the biggest thing that this will change, what this means is now you're tied to okay. Well, one, they don't get the keywords because they're allies, unfortunately, and you're now much more limiting the amount of points you can bring. But as bad as that is, I do understand to an extent. I feel like, yeah, like GW definitely wants to push more the actual units in this book. And have people, and less emphasis on people, like, for example, getting a Cities of Sigmar book, but then just filling it with, like, almost nothing but, Sylvaneth. They're basically saying, again, jerks, just buy the new models and the books that come in this, and the models that come in this book. Okay, stop it. But again, this is what I've been trying to say, though. This is obviously a broken base problem. Like, some people will like that, and some people are going to hate that. There's just no getting around it. Like, I really feel there's not a lot of middle ground, because again, the way it's constructed now will destroy some people's armies as they currently stand. There's just no getting around that. Yeah, so also, and like I said before, as always, the Cities of Sigmar has very high shooting potential. So yeah, this is going to be a heavy shooting army. So, more things change, the more things stay the same, etc., etc. So how will the meta turn out? Well, I'm expecting, well, the truth is I can't know for sure, because we need more actual data and models on table. But I do believe we'll probably see less wizards than as before. At least at first, because as I'm saying that before, we still have cities like Hallowheart and Settler's Gain that do buff wizards in good ways, and there are a lot of cheap usable wizards in the book as always. Like there's the sorceress, and then there's the battle mage, and all that lovely stuff. But there's the magic buffing, I feel, definitely isn't to the same extent as it was in the last book, like where people were just spamming Hallowheart lists, etc. Now, at first, I think that means we will probably see maybe a reduction in magic spam, but the fact that the current General's Handbook, like the season we're in, encourages wizards, I do feel eventually we'll start to see a gradual shift back to heavy magic use as people learn to adapt to the change in the book itself. So there's that. Also, castling, I feel, is very actively being encouraged, especially with the new free guild units. Like the whole idea of creating a big, getting big units and just having them just tank the enemy's attack, stall them up. Like the rules very actively encourage that, especially in regards to free guild and dispossessed units. And following that too, shooting will also be a big factor in all this, because there are a lot of different shooting options in the book as there are before. Like there's it's still, honestly, this army is still, I would probably say, one of the best shooting armies in the game, and I think overall, even though people will experiment, I think we'll inevitably shift back to shooting as the meta starts to naturally coalesce around itself. Now, having said that, elite builds are still definitely a thing in this book. Like there's definitely ways you can do few models on the table, just big tough things. But again, I do feel overall, if people start going competitive, I do feel that big blobs of guys backed up by shooters and a few big heavy hitters, that will probably naturally evolve to be the new meta. But maybe I'm wrong. So my overall thoughts, I'm gonna say I actually really like what they did with this book. Like I feel like at the other hand, I'd say this is a bittersweet kind of update, but I would say more sweet than bitter. Like I said, a lot of people are probably going to be upset with the changes. If it's changed up how people are going to have to have their armies. Some people are probably going to are going to be forced to buy new models because the armies they have right now just literally probably aren't legal anymore. And also the major changes up to the rules in addition are going to change up how people play as well. Like, for example, how you played your Hallowheart army or your Living City army or your Hammerhall army, that there's probably going to be some definite there's definitely going to be some changes to how the rules work in the previous book. Having said that, all the changes I think are reasonable, understandable, and I think I agree with most of them. The book has a much more stronger identity than it has before. It's less order soup and more logistically the Cities of Sigmar. Like this faction literally feels like a faction that is unique as the Stormcast Eternals and the Sylvaneth and the Beasts of Chaos. These guys really are their own thing now. They have unique rules that no other army has currently, and I feel like there's a lot of good stuff in here for experimenting. And honestly, again, this book pretty much actively encourages you to, create your own unique spin on how the models look and are painted. So I think that's really good too. So that's pretty much the abridged version. And my abridged version is, yeah, I'm gonna give it a thumbs up. This is a really good book, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays on the tabletop. But I hope you stop by for part 2. I hope I'll get that. Hopefully, I'll get that up soon, where I'm gonna go into basically just going to go over the rules themselves individually, and probably also do a much more in-depth analysis of the different sub-factions and how they're going to play going forward. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a nice day.